In previous videos I've talked about building a new bike, and that is one bike that I can use for all of my cycling needs. And I'm going to build that bike around this frame set. It consists of the frame itself, forks, handlebars and seat pin. Now, I bought that frame set direct from China, and as you might expect, it was relatively cheap. Because it's cheap, does that mean to say it's poor quality? Or can you get a good value frame that is both relatively cheap and good quality? Well, I'm going to investigate that over the next few videos. In this video, I'm going to see whether any corners have been cut in the design. In subsequent videos, I'll take a look at some of the details of the frame, in particular to seeing whether the manufacturing is up to scratch. Now, in terms of the design, in order to keep the stresses down, what we normally look for are smooth transitions between different parts of the frame. We can see that the top tube has been tapered and that the corners are rounded. That's good because it helps keep the stress concentration down. Again, we can see a nice large curve where the down tube meets the head tube. The same is true at the seat cluster and at the bottom bracket. Everything looks very smooth and transitioned. The same is true here where these drop seat stays meet the seat tube. I'm not a great fan of these drop style seat stays because it leaves the seat tube only supported by the junction between the seat tube and the top tube. Some people would claim that these drop seat stays would add additional comfort by making this frame more compliant, but any basic engineering analysis would show that that is not the case. The additional compliance is really insignificant compared to other compliance issues such as bending of the seat pin or deflection of the tyres. As you can see here, the seat tube is slotted. I've now put the supplied seat tube clamp on here and put the seat pin in, and as you tighten this seat clamp down, it causes the seat tube to pinch the seat pin. Unfortunately, this causes a compressive stress here which can result in damage to the carbon. Carbon's not very strong in compression, and eventually that may cause cracking at this point. However, I do have a solution to try and mitigate against that, and I'll cover that in a future video. The forks are fairly standard. Like the rear triangle, there is plenty of room for larger tyres. One neat feature of this is the bottom of the steerer tube is 1.5 inches in diameter. That's a bit bigger than the normal 1.25 inches. The forks have been designed for the internal cable routing, and it has a hole here for the front gear cable to go through, and that exits down here. Apart from that, I think the forks look fairly unremarkable. If you look closely with the forks and headset installed, you'll see between the top cap and the top of the head tube there's a slight gap. It's about 1 millimeter. Potentially that could let in dirt and water, which could affect the bearings. Although the bearings seem to be well sealed, at the bottom of the head tube there's also a gap. I'll cover what I'm going to do about that in a future video. As I said, this is a full frame set, and it comes with these handlebars. They're fully integrated handlebars where the bars themselves and the stem are made as one piece. There's an issue with this in that it's not very adjustable. So for instance, I can't change the length of the stem. I'm stuck with that. However, I can change the height of the handlebars as there's quite a bit of steerer tube left above the stem in its current position. I'll cover what I'm going to do about that in a future video. A nice feature of these handlebars is that instead of using a pinch bolt to secure the stem to the fork steerer, it actually uses an expanding wedge. The wedge fits down in the hole behind the back of the steerer here and then expands out to clamp the stem to the steerer. This is quite nice because it makes good use of the material properties of the carbon. I just wish when they were designing it they could have made something similar to secure the seat pin. As is quite normal these days, the dropouts are machined directly into the frame and forks. So there's no metal insert that separates the wheel axle from fork, both the front and the rear. So this is just plain carbon. There's a potential issue that if the bolt that holds the wheel in comes loose, then the wheel axle may fret against there, causing wear and eventually making it come loose. I suppose the trick here is to make sure that that axle doesn't come loose. Now for the feature where I keep thinking, did I make a mistake? That feature is that all of the cables, gear cables and brake cables, run through the handlebars, along the underside of the stem, down into the head tube, and then run through the frame and exit near the gear changers and the brakes. Now this makes for a nice clean looking bike. However, it does complicate things, both for the initial build and for when you want to carry out maintenance. So I've been dreading this build just for that one reason. Getting the cables to go through the frame and for all the gears and the brakes to work nice and cleanly. I'm going to have to throw myself into it at some point. That doesn't mean to say I've been sitting on my hands. I have taken some steps to try and ease the problem, and I'll let you know what those are in a future video. One of the reasons I purchased this frame was that it had quite a lot of mounts on it. So in addition to the water bottle mounts on the seat tube and the down tube, there's an additional set under the bottom of the down tube. It also has mounts for racks and mudguards on both the front and the rear. There's a set of 3 pack mounts on each side of the forks. And there's a pair of pack mounts on top of the top tube. This is quite nice because the top of the top tube is fairly flat and therefore it would make a good stable surface for putting a pack on. All of these mounts appear to be what's known as riv nuts. So they're fasteners that are mechanically locked into the frame, and they may have some additional bonding there too. However, I can't really tell how they've been installed, and to be honest, I think they're one of the most likely areas that the frame will fail. However, all that's likely to happen is that the riv nut will become loose, but that's not the end of the world because you can either reinstall them or bond them back into position. This has been a fairly quick and superficial review of my new bike frame. It's been superficial in that I've only looked at the outside. I'm not going to cut it up in order to look at the inside. And it's quick because, well, I'm supposed to fit this into 5 minutes. I suspect this will be longer than 5 minutes, but hey ho. In conclusion, it looks to me as though the frame has been fairly well designed. There are some hints there that the designers have actually thought about what they're doing. However, there are some areas that are, well, let's say challenging from an engineering point of view. The first of these is those internally routed cables. Now, this isn't a problem for the designers. This is my problem because I bought the frame knowing that was the case. However, it does throw up some challenges in terms of routing the cables, making sure that they work smoothly, that they can be maintained, and if I want to change things like handlebars, it creates quite an additional extra hurdle. I think the area that I have most concern about is that seat clamp cluster. Slots in the carbon tube are not ideal. However, as I've alluded, I do have a way of partially mitigating that potential problem. Finally, there's the issue of those riv nuts, which form the basis of the water bottle mounts and the pack mounts. There's potential for them to loosen in the future. However, I can't really do very much about that, so I think I'll just have to see how they go. Overall, I don't see any real areas of concern for the frame, the forks or the handlebars. Those issues that I mentioned, well, as an engineer I worry about things like that, but perhaps I worry a bit too much. We shall find out in the future.